Quickly about Vietnam with us. It's a small group today, so if you guys want to scoot in, you can. Take good notes, pay good attention, okay? It's really interesting, and I'm going to talk about a bunch of cool stuff.
Okay, who knows anything about Vietnam? Anybody have any relatives upon Vietnam? Yeah, Vietnam was a big deal when I was a kid. It consumed the whole country. Not fighting wise, but just the debate of what all happened in Vietnam. So we don't have much time, so we're just going to start talking. Okay. This area was actually a colony of France called French Indochina until World War II. And Japan attacked because France was defeated by Germany. And so these areas weren't controlled by the French anymore because the French were defeated. I mean, that's some government buildings, but not really. So Japan came in and took this whole area over in World War II. So you got the Ho Chi Minh City down here, Hanoi, Da Nang. They're some of the larger cities. I was over there about 10 years ago in Vietnam, and it's actually a rather cool place to be. This is sunset over the Mekong Delta. It's the palace. It's just beautiful through there. So Vietnam is way over here. And Vietnam is not really that small. It's about the size of our East Coast. This is Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a communist. Communism is, remember in Russia, they had the Tsar and the palaces and all the money and the wealth. And Lenin said that's not fair that kids that are 11, 12 years old have to work in the factories because there's no schools in Russia back then. So in Russia, the kids your age are working in the factories or working in the fields. And if you get your arm chopped off in the factory, they throw you outside where it's minus 60 degrees and the police attack, and they bring in a kid that's got 2 arms to do your work for you. And so people suffered a great deal in Russia. And the communists took over and says, okay, everybody is equal. You poor people that are freezing and starving, you can now live in the houses that everyone else is living in. Now, of course, if you own a nice house, if you own a factory, you lose that in communism. But everybody is equal in communism. And the people in America didn't like communism because a lot of people in America made money, and you lose all the money that you made under communism. So, but this man here, he's a Vietnamese, and he learned about communism in Moscow, in Russia. And this is his top general, General Nguyen Giap. Giap led the Vietnamese to defeat the Japanese in World War II. After World War II, France wanted to get these colonies back. They wanted this to be French Indochina again. Well, Vietnam says, wait, we just beat the Japanese, and now France, you want to come back in here? And French brought some of their tanks, and they were ready just to take over Vietnam again. Vietnamese people said, you know what, we kind of like not having anybody rule over us. So the Vietnamese, they started forming together, and this is how they moved weapons around on bicycles. They pulled cannons up mountains by people power. Look at this. These are pieces of cannons, artillery. Pieces all in here. And that's how they move around. And the French couldn't understand, how are these guys getting artillery pieces all over the place? I mean, France was a European power. They should have easily beat Vietnam. That's what the thinking was. But the Vietnamese could move through jungles. They could move artillery pieces this size through jungles because of all the people they had. And so when France and Vietnam had a number of battles, and then the big battle, Dien Bien Phu, is where France was actually attacked by Vietnam, and were surrounded, and the Vietnamese had pulled all these cannons on top of mountains and shot down on the French. And France got beat and surrendered. Vietnam had not only just kicked the Japanese out, they now, just 10 years later, they just beat the French. So the Vietnamese said, okay, let's come to the Paris peace talks, and says, okay, we want to officially be recognized as the country of Vietnam. And they sat down with other country leaders from around the world, and they said, wait a minute, let's actually have an election first. Let's let the people decide what they want to have. And Ho Chi Minh, the leader of Vietnam, says, okay, that's cool, we'll have an election. Have an election in 2 years, and at that point we will have a new leader, and Vietnam will be its own country. This is this is Vietnam, right through here. And they were having the election in a couple of years, and President Eisenhower, here, and his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, recognized that the communists were going to win the election. And they said, wait a minute, we can't allow communism to win. So they canceled the elections. They said, okay, Vietnam, you're not going to have these elections anymore. We're not going to let you have them. And we're just going to divide up Vietnam between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam will be communist. South Vietnam will not be communist. North Vietnam says, we don't like that. That's not cool. How dare you talk to us about our own country? And they sent troops into South Vietnam. And we said, well, wait a minute, what you do with all the soldiers? So we sent some of our troops to help South Vietnam. So here we talk about Ho Chi Minh being the Japanese, and then the French trying to take over again, but are defeated by Vietnam. And this just, everything I just said, this outlines. And by 1964, we have 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam. And, you know, this guy's saving this child in Vietnam, but we never really had jungle fighting like this. I mean, we did in some of the islands in Japan, but never this much jungle. We were not prepared for it. These are the American leaders. We talked about Eisenhower. This is President Kennedy. After Kennedy is Lyndon Johnson, or LBJ. After Johnson became Nixon, President Nixon, and then General Westmoreland was the general that we had during the Vietnam War. And the country supported President Johnson, or LBJ. They supported him in his Vietnam because just like in Korea, the Americans stood up when the communists attacked South Korea. We felt Vietnam was the same thing. We have to stand up to the communist invasion. And it was actually just a civil war, but we felt that if Vietnam, South Vietnam, had collapsed, and all that area would turn communist. So we felt we had to make a stand. And the people suffered. These are our jet fighters here. And this is the newer model of the MiG, Russian fighter. And we bombed and bombed and bombed. B-52. North Vietnam received from Russia a bunch of these surface-to-air missiles, and they started shooting some of our planes down. We were not prepared for that. Capital of North Vietnam is here, Hanoi. Capital of South Vietnam is Saigon. Our army had pushed the North Vietnamese army back up to here. It's a skinny country, isn't it? So how is North Vietnam going to attack South Vietnam if our army's right here? How do they do it? Who knows? Our army's here. Their army's here. How do they attack here? They go around. They went through this country, Laos. They snuck around this way. That's how they did it. And then they had a whole bunch of their spies down here telling these people down here who are very poor, hey guys, why don't you become communists too? Called the Viet Minh. And they started causing problems. And the fighting in this area was just extremely difficult. Of course, we had a lot of helicopters. We could fly soldiers in anywhere and drop them. And our answer to everything was more bombing. We dropped 6 times more bombs on Vietnam than in all of World War II. Think about that. World War II, as big as World War II was, where 80 million people died, we dropped 6 times more bombs in Vietnam than in World War II. Look at this destruction. And now you have people protesting. And a lot of people think that the only people that protested the Vietnam War were hippies. These aren't hippies. This is what I remember as a child. Because my mother was protesting the war. She was definitely not a hippie. My father and Lyndon Johnson grew up together. He knew President Johnson. President Johnson was exhausted. This is President Johnson right here. He's like, how in the heck am I going to get out of this war? He didn't want to be in that war. He had stuff to do in the United States to help our economy. And he's stuck in this war now. Johnson did not want to be in the war. This is Johnson again. He kept, and there's recordings of his conversations in the White House where he's talking about that he's stuck in this war. If he gets out, he will be considered, the first president to lose a war. If he stays in it, he said there's no end in sight. Now you have a bunch of students who says, wait a minute, they're being drafted, they're being forced to go to Vietnam to fight. And here, this is the Pentagon. This is our military headquarters in Washington, D.C., and you have these soldiers protecting it, and these students are protesting. And more bombing. And more destruction in North Vietnam. We talked about in the lower part of Vietnam, these are the tunnels. So this is what our American soldiers had to deal with. They're walking along, and all of a sudden these guys pop up and start shooting at them. And they lived in these tunnels. No, cool, go on in. We're talking about Vietnam, and this is how the American soldiers had to fight. You have Vietnamese hiding in these tunnels, and they pop up and shoot at the Americans. I'm like, how are you supposed to fight somebody like that? And American soldiers have to find a little tunnel, and they're ordered to go in there. Would you like to crawl in there? Would you want to crawl in there? You would? Yeah, look out. They have to go a little handgun. You have to crawl in that tunnel and find the enemies. That's where they fight them. Isn't that crazy? You have to fight them there. Those tunnels are all down here. And this is called the Ho Chi Minh Trails, where the green is South Vietnam, red is North Vietnam, and North Vietnam is kind of sneaking around to Laos and Cambodia. But again, the people in America felt that North Vietnam was still an army of peasants, guys in pitchforks. There really weren't any threat. Our generals were telling our people, we're going to win this war. We're just about finished. We just need more soldiers. We'll win the war in a couple of weeks. Until the Tet Offensive, T-E-T. The Tet Offensive was a massive attack that North Vietnam did on American military bases. Every single military base, we have bases all through here. Bases in Quang Tri, Hue, Da Nang, all of these places we have, Cam Ranh, Saigon, we have military bases there. They attacked everyone. Every single base we had. Every city, we had our embassy down here, it was attacked. And at that point, and they attacked them with these rocket-propelled grenades. This person who pretends to have like a pitchfork, they pull this out of their bag and they launch one of these things at one of our cafes. They attacked us all over. Every single military base was hit. We had tanks, we couldn't see them sneaking up on us in the ditches. And when the American people recognized that every single one of our bases was hit, they're like, wait a minute, this war is not going the way we want it to go. I mean, we are losing this war. So there's a presidential election in the United States, and Richard Nixon wins and becomes president. He says, I have a secret plan to get out of the Vietnam War. More bombing. Has bombing been effective? Not at all. Because they keep coming, the Vietnamese just keep coming. All bombing does is hurts the civilians. And as I said, my mother was in World War II, and she was in 86 bombing raids. She was bombed 86 times. Big bombing raids, with 1,000 bombers dropping bombs on her. And this little girl, we not only drop bombs, but we also drop napalm. It's like a gel made from gasoline. And when it gets on your skin, it makes your skin melt. And this is what happened to her. See her skin melting off? That's what we were doing to civilians. This is that same girl right here as an adult, still showing some of the scars. You remember that earlier picture? Yeah, that's an extremely famous picture. And she did survive. And the fighting continues. And again, it's extremely difficult. We had more soldiers than they did. We had almost twice as many soldiers, but they had better tactics. They were hiding better. They were far more accurate when it comes to tactics. And the protests got bigger and bigger and bigger. Look at all those people protesting. Get the heck out of the Vietnam War. Soldiers protesting. Soldiers protesting the war they were fighting in. Putting flowers at the end of that gun. And the Vietnamese continue to advance on us. We cannot figure out, we are dropping bombs on them. We have B-52 bombers, we have big ships, we have more soldiers, we have total command of the air, but they continue to come and they come and they come. So how do we respond? More bombing. We dropped 6 times more bombs on Vietnam than all bombs dropped in World War II. And it did not stop them. And this area where the Vietnamese were sneaking around to come through here, we bombed that area. We dropped more bombs on Cambodia than we did in all of Japan in World War II. And the Vietnamese kept coming. And the Americans recognized that this was not going to end well. So we started pulling our soldiers out. And most of our soldiers were pulled out. And the Vietnamese came into our capital here, Saigon, in Vietnam. They actually pushed through here. When our soldiers pulled out, they pushed through here. They pushed up from here, the Canada province down here, where I stayed. And they pushed into Saigon. 1975, they defeat South Vietnam. And this is the North Vietnamese tanks, T-80, they got from Russia, and they defeated the Americans. Our first defeat. And this is a picture that people older than me and older remember. This is our helicopter on top of our embassy in Saigon. And these are all the people trying to escape. You remember that picture as a kid?
No.
I remember this.
I was probably, I mean, what year was that?
1975.
No, I wasn't even born yet.
You weren't born in 70? Oh my God. I was born in 64.
I was born in 76, so I was right after.
Yeah. So this is the scene. And of course, American people are like, wait a minute, we were told we're winning this war. And of course, no one ever said we got defeated, but the fact is, this is defeat. and we leave. So this is everything we talked about here. We have all these bombing raids, all the people protesting. Talked about the Tet Offensive, where they attacked every single one of our bases. Nixon becoming president. And eventually South Vietnam collapses. Right now, there is no North and South Vietnam, it's just Vietnam. And if you go there, you'd be very surprised. They love Americans. They want to spend time with you. They want to learn from you. Everyone over there, they're not, I mean, it's a communist country, but they're about as communist as China. They make a lot of money. They do very well. There's some factories over there. Saigon is now called Ho Chi Minh City. You think you're in Los Angeles. I mean, it is a fantastic place to be. I'll be over there in August. But after the Vietnam War, we have about a minute. Cambodia right here. Remember we talked about, we dropped a lot of bombs here in Cambodia to stop the Vietnamese from sneaking around? Well, a communist came to power in Cambodia. His name was Pol Pot. Anybody know? Heard that name before? Pol Pot. He's one of the worst people in the history of the world. 1975, Pol Pot fights against the government in Phnom Penh, which is their capital, Cambodia, and they defeat him. And Pol Pot tells everybody here in Phnom Penh, everybody in the city, 2 million people, you have to leave the city. American bombers are coming. And what did American bombers do? They wiped things out, right? So everybody in the city, 2 million people, leave Phnom Penh. What does Pol Pot do to all of them? Puts them in concentration camps. Anybody that had glasses, they killed. Anybody that spoke a foreign language, they killed. Pol Pot wanted to return Cambodia to the year 1 and start over again. Everybody in the country was in concentration camps, and you know who the guards were? 12 and 13-year-olds. They were told, all the kids told, turn in your parents if you hear them speaking another language, if you see them with glasses. And he wanted to make everybody to work in the fields. And Phnom Penh, the big city, was totally empty. City of 2 million people, totally empty. If you ever go to Phnom Penh, you think you're in Paris, because the avenues are wide, and there's balconies, and the architecture. But it's like in a time warp. So Pol Pot has turned Cambodia into a communist country. Everybody's in concentration camps. And after 3 years, and about 28% of the population murdered by Pol Pot, Vietnam attacks. And Vietnam attacks and defeats Pol Pot and frees the people. And you know what the United States did? We gave $12 billion to Pol Pot to fight the Vietnamese. Do you believe that?
That's how it always turns out.
$12 billion to fight, because we were so scared of Vietnam. We did not see that Cambodia was even worse. But General Giap of Vietnam defeats Pol Pot. At the exact same time, China, who was friends with Cambodia, attacks up here with 500,000 soldiers. And General Giap had to fly up here and create an army out of accountants, podiatrists, doctors, anybody that he could. And he created an army out of nothing to stop the Chinese. Americans couldn't stop the Chinese in Korea. With an army, he did it with nobody. And was able to put some people together, and they stopped the Chinese. So that's why General Giap is considered one of the 10 all-time greatest generals, according to the Imperial War Academy in London. Any questions? Y'all have it all memorized?